Joining us this afternoon are Sisters Rita Brink, OSB, and Patricia Homan, OSU, to discuss their personal experiences with internal and external communications as their communities faced the difficult move toward closure. They will offer insight on confidentiality, sharing a common story, dealing with various publics, what to communicate, and the adjustments made along the way. Before we begin, we would like to ask each sister to introduce themselves and their communities.
Good afternoon. I'm Sister Rita Brink. I'm Benedictine from St. Walburg Monastery across the river in northern Kentucky. My background basically is in education. I've been in education for a number of years, more numbers in administrative parts of education than actually in the classroom. Today, however, I'm here with you because of an experience that I had. I was privileged to walk with a community as they processed closure. And so that's the story that I'll be sharing with you today.
Good afternoon. I'm Sister Patricia Homan. I'm an Ursuline of Brown County from here in Cincinnati area. My role at this point in the community is as congregational minister. And in that role, I oversee the archives and the administration of the community. We are 17 at this point, so we have been through what Rita will talk about, and I will share with you our experience of continuing the legacy and making sure that especially the institutions that we have founded are continuing with the legacy and the heritage of the Ursulines.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted to share the story of an experience that I had, which was humbling as well as enriching and spiritual. I think it was Joseph Campbell who once said that everything starts with a story. So this afternoon, I've come to tell a story. It's a story that developed as I walked with a group of Benedictine women as they affirmed the closing of their monastery. In telling the story, I will also be sharing some of the nuts and bolts, the pieces of the communication plan that was put in place as we worked through the process. The community that I walked with was a small community located in the northwestern part of Pennsylvania. The community, St. Jove Monastery, was the first Benedictine monastery in North America. The community was founded in 1852 when 3 Benedictine women from Eichstätt, Bavaria, arrived in a relatively new settlement in St. Mary's, Pennsylvania. It was a small settlement at the time, surrounded by forest. The monastery, from day one, had a deep and rich relationship with the people of the town. Throughout the town's history, the sisters were highly respected and credited with being influential and in establishing a stable town. The sisters worked in schools. They established schools rich in the arts. They opened an academy. They taught in the public schools for a number of years until 1859, when the state of Pennsylvania passed the Smith-Garb Act, which said, as teachers in the public school, You may not wear your religious garb. As a matter of fact, that law is still on the books in Pennsylvania. Then we jump forward to 1933. The sisters embraced the responsibility of operating the town's hospital at a time when the hospital was struggling to make ends meet. The following year, 1934, the hospital was destroyed by a fire, and as the fire was in full flame, the patients were moved to the monastery about a half a mile down the road. Following the fire, the sisters closed their academy, made a few necessary adjustments, and within a short time, the hospital was in full operation in its new location, the former academy building. The sisters took leadership in securing funds to rebuild the hospital, putting almost all of their savings toward the effort. Several times, however, construction had to stop because funds were lacking. It was 7 years later, in 1941, when the newly constructed and expanded hospital was able to reopen on its original location. Interacting with the townspeople when I arrived in St. Mary's, it was very clear that the sisters were held in high regard and were seen as a major stabilizer in the town. I arrived in St. Mary's in the fall of 2012. At that time, the monastery was home to 17 Benedictine women. The community had been struggling for some time, doing their best to keep it operating, but it just wasn't working. The year prior to my arrival, the community spent time looking at various options that they may have for the future. I saw as my first task was to gain the sisters' respect and trust as their new administrator. I didn't know them, and they didn't know me. I spent my time being present, interacting, listening, and engaging in friendly and open conversation, and exploring questions such as, what is your hope for the community? What expectations do you have of me? What do you want to know about me? And what do you want me to know about your community? I spent a lot of time reviewing and digesting several surveys that the community had responded to the year prior to my arrival. Also, I tried to listen very carefully during the interaction with the sisters and in reviewing the surveys, trying to listen to hear what is it that is not being said. My willingness and ability to truly listen was immensely valuable and informative. Serious dialogue with the community about their future started about 2 months after I arrived, and it was about 1 year later, on January the 13th, 2014, that the community affirmed a resolution to work toward closure. On January the 14th, the day after they affirmed the resolution, a press release was available to the local media. The press release was hopefully clear, concise, and complete, offering enough information and answering enough questions to avoid having people create their own facts. The press release read, after 3 years of prayerful study, the Benedictine Sisters of Elk County, Pennsylvania, agreed on January the 13th, 2014, to move forward with plans to close St. Joe Monastery. In 1852, God led 3 Benedictine women from Germany to the newly settled area of St. Mary's, Pennsylvania. For the past 160 years, the sisters have reached out, offering opportunities for faith development and formal education. After the devastating fire of November 1934, which destroyed the town's hospital, the sisters offered what was their academy as a temporary location. Along with providing the necessary leadership for operations, a ministry undertaken in 1933, the sisters were instrumental in providing the lead for raising funds to rebuild the hospital. The presence and the ministry of the Benedictine Sisters of St. Joe Monastery have, over the years, touched and influenced thousands of lives, sharing faith, love, and friendship. In return, the sisters have been enriched and blessed by the generous support, appreciation, and friendship of the people with whom they have shared life. The town, and especially the people of St. Mary's, and the surrounding areas are and will remain a vital part of the sisters' prayer and blessing. As the work of closing moved forward, not all the questions have been answered. Much work remains. Each sister is presently in conversation with Benedictine communities where they will seek to transfer their vows. Your prayers and support in the time of transition are important links in the process. May God's love continue to enrich the lives as the future unfolds. 1 month later, on February the 23rd, the town gathered to honor the sisters. A prayer service was organized by the townspeople that was followed by a reception held in one of the parish churches. Over 1,000 people attended the prayer service and reception. Throughout the entire process, leading up to affirming a resolution regarding the community's future, there was a need to talk about confidentiality, consistent message, prioritizing a list of who needed to be contacted and when they would be contacted and how they would be contacted. How would they receive the information? A personal call, an email, a written letter. Confidentiality was important, not because anything was a secret, but the sisters needed to be free from outside influence to process the reality and their best path to the future. And they needed to be free to express their feelings regarding sensitive issues in a safe environment. Developing a constant message was also essential so that facts and information would be shared. A consistent message would help guard against 17 personal renditions being told, though a personal touch would be reflected in each one's sharing. In attempting to create a constant message, the community discussed and agreed upon responses to questions such as, why is the monastery closing? When will it close? Where will the sisters go? Is there anything we can do to help? And the list went on and on. In prioritizing the list of who to be contacted, we asked questions like, who needs to be contacted? who will contact each of these people or groups? And how will they be contacted? Early on in the process, I met with the bishop, the diocesan vicar of religious, and the abbot of the St. Vincent's Archabbey in Latrobe. I did that to introduce myself, since I was a stranger in the diocese, and to talk about the work that I was there to do with the sisters. It's obvious why I would meet with the bishop and vicar, since we were in their diocese. I also met with the abbot at St. Vincent's because the sisters had a special relationship with St. Vincent's because most of their building was located on property that was leased from the abbey. On January the 13th, after the sisters affirmed their resolution to work for closure, the sisters called their families, some called close friends, hoping that their families and close friends would know of the decision before they found out from a friend that they ran into at the gas station or Walmart. I immediately called the Federation president to report the decision that had been made, and I had been in contact with the Federation president through the whole process. I also called the bishop, the vicar of religious, and the abbot. And the press release was ready to go to the public. Of course, once the press release was released, news traveled like wildfire. Our attempt was to give out the right amount of information at the right time, as you well know, is the most effective and perhaps the only way to help control the rumor mill. Throughout the process, I periodically met with employees to keep them informed, to let them know that their job was coming to an end, but there was no way of knowing exactly when that would happen. I also talked to them about the fact that I would understand if a job opening came their way, they would have to accept that job when the job was available and not when we were closing. Fortunate to me, who was the administrator, another one of our Benedictine federations who had experienced a number of communities coming to closure were at the time developing a handbook to help guide what needs to be attended to as you move toward closure. It was extremely helpful. And one process in that handbook was a complete outline of the kind of communications and the plans that needed to be put in place to keep everybody informed, inform them at the right time, and with the right message. The entire story of St. Joe Monastery is now available in print. Like a Mustard Seed was published just this year in 2022, and it's available for purchase on lulu.com. As you know, good communications plays an important role leading up to and following the discussion and the decision as a community begins to look forward. So that was my story, that's my experience. And a little later, after Sister Patricia does her presentation, we'll open it for questions to see what else it is you'd like to know that I may not have thought to share with you, and also that would also help me if I'm ever in a situation like this again, maybe to know better what to do, when, and how. So I thank you for your attention.
This morning, I went to Mass at one of the parishes near me, and the priest, considering that today is the feast of the archangels. Okay, is that better? Okay, thank you, sorry. Today is the Feast of the Archangels. He had a story to tell that involved Padre Pio. And the story goes that there was an automobile accident and a young man was seriously injured. And the brother of the young man decided he would go to telegram Padre Pio and ask for prayers for his brother. So while the young man was on the way to make the telegram, the young man received a telegram from Padre Pio saying that your brother is going to be just fine. Everything will be all right. So a man asked Padre Pio how he knew that this young man was going to approach him with a telegram. And he said, "Don't you know the angels have a faster system of communication than the Italian postal service?" So I'm assuming that this group of communicators who have to be close to the angels are providing a great system of communication for religious women. Along with the story of closure is also the story of continuing the legacy and allowing the constituents from your institutions to grow and develop that legacy in a variety of ways. So what I'll do today is to share with you some of the ways that we, as the Ursulines of Brown County, are continuing our legacy with the constituents that we have. So, charism is the grace given by the Holy Spirit to a religious institute to enable them to carry out their special mission. Our mission as Ursulines is education. A videographer from Channel 19 worked with the communication people at Ursuline Academy and developed the video that I want you to see because it talks about charism. The charism is who we are, and the mission is what we do. Each student who leaves Ursuline as a graduate will believe in herself and in her capabilities, her gifts, have the self-confidence that she needs in order to succeed. My name is Sister Patricia Homan. I am the Congregational Minister for the Ursulines of Brown County.
I had gone to Catholic schools, even in grade school, but when I came to Ursuline, I met sisters who truly saw education and the development of young women as a vocation. They saw it as a calling. Whether it was an art class or an English class, I always felt that they were really tuned in to what my strengths were, what my capabilities were. My name is Ramona Payne, class of '76, and I am the president of Ursuline Academy.
Charism is basically at Ursuline, it's the mission of the Ursuline Sisters. It's what they set out to do with making a school and making a community for young women in Cincinnati. It's really implemented in the way that the teachers teach their classes, celebrating and focusing on individual people and their voices. We value every person's voices and their values and their vision for what their future could be.
Who we are women of faith, first and foremost.
One of the big ways that I've grown in my faith is being able to go out and reach out and help other people, and I feel like that's been a big path that's opened up for me.
Secondly, we are educators.
Ursuline is a place where a young woman can know that she can grow into not only a faith-filled leader, but also an intellectually curious, critical thinker.
So our educational process deals with the whole person and the unique qualities of each individual. Our lives are so much more enriched by understanding and sharing those different gifts with each other.
I see it in friend groups and communities across the school. Nobody is afraid to be themselves, and they're not worried about fitting in with their friend group. Everybody just accepts people as they are.
We are part of something bigger, continuing the legacy, but also all of this started because of kind of the courage, innovation, and the faith of one woman in particular.
One of the things St. Angela told us was that the more we know someone, the more we respect them, the more we will love them, and the more we love them, the more we will have them engraven in our hearts, each individually.
It's just like any other family. You can have all of these different personalities and gifts and talents and opinions, but there is this emphasis on respecting.
I taught at Ursuline for 27 years, and I loved every minute of it. I loved working with the students. I loved their openness and their honesty and their ability to grow. And I watched them grow from freshmen to seniors, from coming in as intimidated and nervous girls, really, to being very articulate and capable young women, and knew that we had done an amazing thing for them, that we had given them a gift of education that would keep them going for the rest of their life, and that learning is not just for school, it is for life. And I think we did that, and we have done that for 125 years. Thank you. It was intimidating to do, really, although he was very easy to work with. It was a half-hour interview. It was short, sweet, and he pulled out of it the essence of what the charism really is. And the Ursuline Academy uses that, and it's on their website. So it is one of their pieces that they use to distinguish them from other schools. The legacy is something that's handed down. It is a gift from the predecessors, from the past. And for us, as a community, that translates into the history of our community, the founding stories, the significant transitions within the congregation, changes initiated by Vatican II certainly were a part of that. Major decisions, such as relocating the school, transitioning from a ministry, and especially for us, the stories of the members. And that is expressed in archives, legacy formation, and communication. So we're going to talk about all three of those areas. And with the archives, it is the documents as well as the artifacts. And trying to put the documents into segments that will be storytelling so that it makes sense. So the stories before 1910, when there was a definite distinction in the community. So those early stories, the founding stories. And for the members, and we're working on that one now, it is a fact sheet for each member, their date of birth, date of death, where they went to school, their education post-high school, which for us was significant. Our women went to amazing schools. Education was an important piece for us. And the legacy of the schools they attended and the degrees they received is a phenomenal story that needs to be told. And then we're also doing a kind of a reflection on that individual, from a person who knew that person. So these go all the way back to the late 1800s when we began this. And so we're compiling them so that the students will have an understanding of who those women were. There is a piece of artwork on the wall at Ursuline Academy that has the names of each of the women who taught in our different locations. We're going to add to that the stories of each of those women so they understand where those women came from and how they impacted Ursuline Academy and the schools where they taught. The documents will certainly be important, but the artifacts for us are also significant because a number of our members were artists. And so we have a rich supply of beautiful artwork that we will need to steward and find housing for in some way that connects it to the Ursulines of Brown County. Next, we have the legacy formation. And for us, that is the intentional information presented to and structured for those who come after us. And it involves all of the constituents of the different institutions. We begin with the foundational story. We try and get them to come to Brown County to see the original buildings that are still there. And we have worked to steward the property as well as the institutional situations. So we did early on in 2010 the legacy statements. And we did that for our property. We as a community sat down and determined what was significant for us, what we wanted to pass on in relation to the property as well as the institutional, the educational institutions. That's the overview of our property at one time, the barns, the major buildings, the water tower. We then did the legacy statements for the educational institutions. And in line with that, we did the legacy agreement, which became a legal document where we laid out for the institutions our expectations for them as they carried on when we were no longer there. And the communication. And in this area, we have tried to do some creative use of our history. And when we celebrated our 175th 2 years ago, we did a timeline that was part of our website. But the creativity of our finance manager said, you know, we ought to put this in some kind of a booklet. We ought to have this so we can use it as a give out during the 175th celebration. So we worked with our printer who made a booklet for us that is small. It contains everything from the beginning to 2022. And we use that when people come to do tours, when we're working with new board members, when somebody drops in unexpectedly. That's the piece we pull out and provide for them because it's the history of the Ursulines in a snapshot situation. We also did a booklet on the chapels of Chatfield. And we did this actually with a grant from the Sisters of Charity Foundation. So we were certainly grateful to them. And it illumines the architecture, the artwork, the stained glass windows. And then we put together, by the way, the sisters did all the carving on that, in that chapel. They had been instructed by Ben Pittman, who was a noted wood carver in Cincinnati at the University of Cincinnati. He came out to Brown County, instructed our early women, and they, when they built the chapel, included all of that hand-carved wood. This is the St. Angela Chapel at the OTR campus, the inner city school. We built a chapel into that as well. And so the booklet has both of those chapels highlighted. And again, it's a giveaway so that people can see the art that we are pretty famous for. When we celebrated our 175th, the alums from the boarding school, which closed in 1981, asked us to consider applying for a historic marker. And so with their assistance, we did the research. One of the alums did the writing for it, and condensing 50 pages of research into 2 sides with 131 words on each side was an amazing work of art by the alum. But it really puts on the property the significance of the history of the Ursulines and the educational impact that we have had. Also, our cemetery is used as a statement of our legacy. So actually, it was an unusual situation. Our cemetery had a 1-car road in, very little turnaround space, and then it was 1 car out. And when Sister Peter died in 2006, it was in December. The funeral was in early January. It was very cold and snowy, and the 1 road in didn't really work very well. And after that funeral, we said, this can never happen again. So we made arrangements to, we were either going to widen the road or we were going to cut a road around the cemetery proper, which is what we ended up doing. And as that project evolved, we decided to make an entrance that was reflective of the entrance to the main property. We had the cross in the wilderness, which was the cross on the first church raised in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and we wanted to preserve that in some way, and so we embedded it into the wall. And we told the story of how that particular piece of property became the cemetery. It was the first place where the sisters, when they arrived, sat down to eat lunch after having come across the fields. And so it became their last resting place. On the inside of those stories on the wall are the names of the members of the community. And so that will be forever a part of that property. As I was thinking about this and the use of our history and our heritage and doing it in creative ways. And that's your job as communicators. I kept thinking about the prayer that we use a lot of times at funerals from Ecclesiastes. And so I adapted it for us as communicators and as people who work with communities coming to fulfillment. There is a season for everything, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time for giving birth and a time to coming to fulfillment, a time for planting, a time for uprooting what has been planted, a time for restructuring, a time for collaboration, a time for lamenting, a time for rejoicing, a time for tears, a time for laughter, a time for archiving, a time for downsizing, a time for discernment, a time for decision-making, a time for letting go, a time for peace. We contemplate the tasks that God gives us to accomplish. All that God does is apt for its time. But though God has permitted us to consider time in its wholeness, we cannot comprehend the work of God from beginning to end. As communicators for the religious congregations, you support and assist us with the sharing of the story of those congregations, and that is important work. Nurturing the legacy and heritage and sharing those gifts with the world is invaluable service. Telling the stories of the members and the unfolding of the ministry provides an example for those who come after us. And we are deeply grateful for your dedication and commitment to the women religious around the country. Thank you. So questions. Who has questions? Thank you. Oh. Here, you need the microphones, I bet.
No, I want to start by saying I really like the examples, so I think you did a wonderful job, both of you, in providing real examples. I'm curious for both of you if you did any town halls, listening sessions for those in the community that were really, longtime supporters, and the act of listening is part of this process. Can you give any examples of that, of really engaging the community and just letting them, if nothing else, sort of maybe vent or share their memories?
We did not do that in St. Mary's, Pennsylvania. It happened on individual levels, but not as a gathering where people came together to do that. A lot of that did happen at the reception after the prayer service that the town put on. That reception went on for 2 hours plus, and it was the interacting of the sisters with the town people. So a lot of it did happen there, as well as some individual things, but we never organized a time specifically for that to happen.
We did it with the boards. When we were working with them, we did that type of process. We haven't done it with the schools per se, with the students or the faculty, and I think that's because we still are fairly active in those areas. I think at some point we will do that type of a situation, but we have not we have not gotten there yet.
I bring that up from a healthcare perspective. I've been involved with closing hospitals, and it's really difficult. It's not easy to do those type of meetings, but it is healing. So I would just, as those of you that work with your congregations and run into that, I would really recommend it. It's not easy. It's painful for, hearing some of the comments, but in the end, it really does help a lot.
I think some of that also depends on the group you're working with. My honest opinion would have been, I don't think we could have done that in St. Mary's. I don't think the sisters were strong enough to be able to do that kind of a sharing session. However, they did do it somewhat in the informal setting of the reception after the prayer service. I think it would have been very difficult to get them to commit to a specific event that was structured for that.
I work with a group of 31 sisters in Omaha, Nebraska. They've been in completion for quite a long time, and most of their supporters are alumni from their school. They closed their school in 1974, so most of the people who tell the story are in their late 60s. Since they closed their school, they've had many ministries, and we continue to help transition those into nonprofits. Do you have any wisdom to share about how to get people to then be interested in these legacy ministries? I'm having a little bit of a hard time getting people to now be interested in donating to or participating in this next generation of ministry that the sisters are doing.
We had 2 schools, and those schools are both functioning, so we aren't there. And we have a food pantry that is on its own very successful, so they don't really need us to support them in that way. I think a lot of it is the personal relationships with the people you want to engage in those issues, and informing your alumna, especially of those ministries and how they can continue the legacy of the sisters through that.
You talked a little bit about prioritizing who received the message prior to the press release going out. Where did associates or oblates and the staff of the congregation fall within that prioritization, and did they hear before the press release went out?
The sisters in St. Mary's had not had an organized group of associates or oblates for a number of years. So in their plan of communication, that did not factor in. A lot of it happened by individuals and close friends. I think the other thing that probably made a little bit of a difference in St. Mary's is a very small town, population of about 12,000. And for a number of years, their experience was when people were in college age, they would go away to college, and not many of them came back and settled in St. Mary's. So the strong support that the sisters once had was with the older people in the parish. The younger people at that point, many of them didn't even know the sisters, because it had been a number of years since many of them were active in even the elementary schools. And the same was true for the one Catholic high school in the town. The sisters hadn't been on those faculties for a number of years. And so the support from that particular aspect had kind of dwindled. in St. Mary's, the property and the buildings were sold to the parish. The original part of the monastery was actually built onto the back of the parish church. And then it expanded from there. But as it worked out, we were working with another group that was interested in purchasing the buildings and the ground. But where it ended up was the parish was able to purchase it. Today, most of the buildings have been taken down. The only part of the building that remains is the original chapel, which was built in 1886. And the parish has refurbished that, and it has become like an events center, specifically for fine arts kinds of things and various parish or activities. But that's the only part of the building that now lasts. But then there are other markers on the property that, well, there's in one part of the property, there's a large statue of St. Joseph, after the St. Joseph Monastery was the name of the place. There's a marker in the cemetery, the Sister Cemetery, which was on that property, that is now under the care of the parish. So there's a marker in the cemetery. But the buildings, as like, it was a 88,000 square foot of building. The only thing that remains is the chapel, which is relatively small, but large enough to have some kind of activities in it.
Patsy, can you say a little bit about all the insight and foresight your community has had related to land trusts? I think that's important for people to hear.
Okay, so we had 400 acres in rural Brown County, and knew probably in the 1990s that we would need to pass that property on in some way, that we did not want it to become condos or whatever when we were gone. And so we began working with a group of conservationists and to study the land. We did all kinds of research on options, and eventually in 2014, I think, we did we had done a statement on our expectations for the continuation of the property. And in 2014, we turned it over to a conservancy, which was a local conservancy, but is now a statewide organization. So the agricultural pieces that was pretty close to 200 acres, we gave to the conservancy. And since that time, we have sold that property to a local farmer with the understanding that there was a conservancy on it, and it will be maintained as agricultural land. The reason for us doing that was that in 1845, when we established the boarding school in Brown County, there were no Krogers to run to get food. We had to be self-sustaining. And so a portion of our property had been used in agricultural development and in raising farm animals and tending to the food needs of our population. So we wanted to protect that. In one of the things that we had done as a community was to, in 1937, we, working with the WPA, did a low-head dam on the property so that it would dam a natural creek that ran through and would provide water for the village where we were located, as well as our own property. And so with that, we also wanted to preserve the water. And in the early 1990s, the water processing plant was closed because we tapped into a larger system. So we took the water tower down, and the EPA came and offered us a grant to take the Lowhead Dam down. So we have also done that with the EPA's assistance. And that is now under Water Conservancy, so that creek will not be developed in any way. It will remain a natural creek. So those were we were very conscious of being a part of the preservation of that property because it had served us so well.
Sister Patricia, if you're willing, I would love to have a copy, and probably others would too, of the adaptation you did of Ecclesiastes.
I'm happy to do that. Is there an email or can I give it to somebody and they'll email it out? Oh, okay. Okay. Okay.
Just thank you both for sharing this story. Stories, because I'm sure there was a lot of emotional work and processing for your communities. Can you talk at all about that? Like, how did you come to consensus or deal with the letting go, kind of that Paschal mystery to make way for the future?
There was a lot of passion in our conversations, a lot of heartache. And for some of the sisters, there was an added burden because they were the first Benedictine foundation in the United States. And some of them were having trouble coming to terms with, if we can't make it as the first foundation, how can anybody else make it? So not a lot of them, but there were some that were really kind of stuck in that spot. So I encouraged any one of them that wanted to come and talk with me about it, and we would have a one-on-one with it, as well as the fact that we would talk at community meetings. And one of the things that I try to instill in them is what is happening is not anybody's fault. It's the reality of how things come about and how things have to be let go of. And so we had a number of conversations around that. And, you know, anytime somebody would say something that kind of sounded like it was their fault, I would remind them that this is nobody's fault. This is what's happening, and there's a reason why it's happening, which we may never know, but it's all in the plan, and nobody's taken responsibility for being the cause of it. It's a natural thing that happens. Things come about, and things are let go of. And so over time, I don't know that some of them will ever move beyond that, but we just tried to make it as healing as possible.
For us, it was clear in 1978 probably that we needed to close our boarding school. And so for us, that was kind of the beginning of the recognition that we were not able to continue in the way we had. So I think, and then once we had made the decision to close the boarding school, we had to tear down 2 of those buildings because they were so large, and we just didn't have the resources to continue maintaining them, and we didn't have a reason to maintain them. So I think there was a lot of that initial in that closure and the tearing down of those buildings. I think since then, we just know it's part of our life and our death. And that, I think, is why we have been so intent on passing the legacy on. You know, we have 2 schools, and they're doing well, and they carry the legacy now for us, and they are very aware of that, and that's intentional. And we know that that will continue.
So the second part of my question then is, you know, and I appreciate sharing that very much, since we just heard right before you about vocations and moving into the future, and it's this tension that we hold right now. It's a both and. Have either community thought about, like, how can you assist with that vocation to the future of the larger religious life picture going forward?
We have not really talked about it as a community, but that's a good question. I think that certainly is a good question. And again, I think I would have to go back to the legacy and the value of that legacy, and letting people know pretty outright what that is and how that will continue.
I suspect in the setting in St. Mary's, PA, part of that legacy will continue. There are 2 historic heritage displays in the town, one with the Historical Society and one with the parish. The parish has a room that they've dedicated to the heritage and the artifacts of the sisters, to tell the story of the sisters. And with the older people in the town, I mean, the reverence that they had for the sisters and what they brought to that town and continue to give to that town is very strong, even though a number of the young people don't come back. Their ancestry will always honor the sisters and give the sisters credit for keeping that town going. I've never been in a town where I've seen the strength of that kind of message in the people who live there. It was astounding to me. It was hard to talk to anybody. I'm going to put out an age. I would say anybody over 50 years old that I ever interacted with always gave the sisters the credit for making the town what it was and continuing the spirit and the livelihood in the town. It was just astounding.